Greetings folks, Steve here, and I am back to work on the Z, working on our Ford 8.8 axle swap. And last week I got a little bogged down on my plans because of the sound deadening in the Z's floorboards. So what I've done is I finally tracked down some dry ice. I had a hard time finding some at first, but finally found a grocery store that actually sells it and dumped it on the floorboard of the Z probably about 45 minutes ago or so. And I just want to make sure I get on film how awesome this works to get rid of sound deadening. So I've literally just like chipped 2 times with the pry bar, and it's just taken huge chunks of the sound deadening away. This is a super effective way to do this. The sound deadening seems impossible to remove any other way that I have tried. It gets sticky, it's thick, it's adhered to the sheet metal so hard, you end up like you can't grind it away, you can't cut it away. But this dry ice just makes it so simple. Let me show you how good this works. You can already see like the chunks of it right here. Look at this. Oh my God, I didn't even hit that. That was just next to something I hit. This is incredible. And watch this. I mean, it takes like 0 effort at all. And look, it's just coming off in huge chunks. Unbelievable. And look, like the metal underneath it is like still painted and like clean looking. Let's see, what's this? Oh, I'm just tapping that. Unreal. Unreal. I gotta do the whole car because this stuff is literally everywhere. It's right here, here, here. It's right here. I mean, I don't think this stuff's real heavy. In fact, it's really not. It's really not heavy. But for how easy it is, it'd totally be worth just getting rid of all of it. That's super cold to the touch, even with the glove on. But yeah, that's so cool. So super excited about that. Gonna get everything cleaned up back here, make a nice clean cut. I'm gonna go get some more to do the driver's side because I didn't buy very much because you can't store it, I guess, without having like a special fridge for it. But yeah, tomorrow we'll finish doing that side. We'll have a real good layout and plan of how we need to proceed from here. So I've been busy at it, chopping up the floorboards in the Z here. I want to keep this beam intact. So the car has what's obviously like structural, and then it has other like thin sheet metal that's clearly just like covers space. Like this right here is just super thin, super bendable, just thin sheet metal across here on the floorboard here. But then you have this beam that goes through the middle and it's like totally boxed in. That's why I chose to weld my roll bar to that. You got a little beam back here, you know, that does like this U shape, reinforces the strut towers. On the bottom of the car, there is a beam that goes lengthwise right here, and it goes all the way to the front. So I deliberately wanted to keep my cut inside of that beam. I don't want to compromise these beams any more than I absolutely have to. But on that note, I did have to chop into this one quite a bit, and even like where it's boxed on the bottom. And I think I'm still gonna have to take more away there, as well as cut a little bit higher up there just to create ample clearance for our bars. If I have to cut this much thinner, I'm gonna go back and reinforce it somehow. You know, we'll just kind of see where we end up. Right now my strategy is cut away as much as I need to make room for the new parts. Then we'll go back and reinforce stuff. But we already are getting a lot of reinforcing from the roll bar that's tying this side in with that side. So I don't think it's gonna be a big problem, but I'd like to put any reinforcement back that I took away in this process. So I'm trying to figure out my push point, where to anchor the front of the ladder bar. So in doing that, I've got a couple of bright orange string lines that I've made. The one that goes across the middle there is the center of gravity line. This is totally just a guess. I have no idea where the center of gravity is, but I think something that's pretty common in these kind of setups is using like on like a V8, you'd use like the camshaft line for the start, and then you'd use like a laser level to get it nice and level all the way across. And in theory, that should get you pretty close. Of course, this is an overhead cam engine, so I just kind of went probably about where the head gasket would be up here in the front, give or take. And the car is sitting with quite a bit of rake on it right now. And I think it's going to have quite a bit of rake on it, just the way that it's all set up, the way that it's all gonna finish out. A lot of that has to do with just our space constraints back here with the solid axle. We are gonna have to have the body up a little higher off of the axle, which is gonna put the ass of the car up a little bit higher. So I'll be running quite a bit of rake. Right now it's probably sitting at about 2 inches of rake, which, you know, for a drag car, it's not crazy, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to go much less than that without redesigning a whole lot of stuff here, which I'm not trying to do. So center of gravity line up here across the top, and then our neutral line is determined from a line that starts at where the bottom of the tire tread would be, where the tire is contacting the pavement on the rear, which of course is hypothetical. You know, the car is obviously up several inches on the front, and so kind of following that same theory, started the line where I thought the tire would be touching pavement, and where it intersects, and then it goes up and intersects with the center of gravity line right here, directly above this front spindle. So that's how you get this line here. And that's the line we care about. That's our neutral line. And what that means is if our push point anchors along this line, obviously if you had like a, you know, theoretically if you had like a super long ladder bar and it was way up here, obviously we have a much shorter one. So we are going to be targeting around here for our push point. And I'll zoom in a little bit here and you can see we're pretty close. Like right now, the way I have the ladder bar sitting up there, it's not attached to anything. It's just pushed up against here. It's not welded to the axle. And of course I have nothing to anchor it to up here yet. But you can see there is our eyelet, which just kind of has an extension holding it up in that slot right now. But if I go like totally with what I think is pretty close to level, you can see we're just a little bit above the neutral line. And that's pretty good. So I know my lines are pretty crude and it's really like guesswork here, but I did spend a lot of time measuring up ride height and getting the car how I think it will be sitting on pavement at the ride height I think I'm going to use in the rear. The axle's perfectly centered, side to side, forward and back. Like it's exactly where I think it's going to be. So just really meticulously tried to just, obviously a total guess, but trying to make it as close to the realm of sanity as possible. And I think we're pretty close. So if the push point is up above the neutral line up here, you're going to have more of a separation. So the higher above the neutral line is, the more separation we're going to get between the tire and the body, meaning literally the axle's going to want to do this. The ladder bars are going to want to push up, and it's going to lift the back of the car. It's going to separate the tire and the chassis on the launch, which plants the tire down on the ground, and that's a lot of times that's what you want. I think that's standard practice for like a radial car. I could be totally wrong about that, but I think radial cars typically are going to have a little more separation. If you were to have the push point below the line, then we're going to have more squat, where it actually squeezes the tire to the body. It allows the back of the car to kind of flatten out and you know, throw that weight to the back. So it'd be a little bit softer launches that way. I don't think there's a right and a wrong here. I think you just kind of try, you know, whatever works best. I'd like to be a little bit above the neutral line. I think planting the tire hard is going to be a little more beneficial than letting the car squat and transfer a whole bunch of weight. Just because we mostly race on like prep surfaces where, you know, if the prep's good, you don't want to sacrifice all that power by letting the car squat and suck up all the forward momentum. So just kind of a rough outline here, just trying to make sure I'm not going to have the ladder bar in some crazy outrageous position when I'm done here and a car handle all crazy. But that's what I'm thinking right now. A lot of ladder bar setups have what's called a tracking bar or a tracking rod, which would connect to one ladder up at the front, and it would go back and connect to the other ladder all the way back at the back, a diagonal bar that obviously will just keep the axle from being able to go side to side. And the panhard bar attaches to the body on one side and spans all the way across and attaches to the axle on the other side. What you want with the panhard bar is for it to be as level as possible, because when only one side's going to go up and down with the chassis, the other side's going to stay on the axle. And so if you had the bar crooked and that was happening, you'd be effectively like pulling the axle side to side. So steel plates are in, plate over there, plate right here, and I like that. Everything looks good there. So now I'm going to start working on our chromoly tube. That's going to go from side to side. That's going to be a tricky one. Obviously, the more time I spend getting this pipe to fit just so perfectly, the easier it's going to be to weld in. But we got a curve on one side on the tunnel side and then flat on the door jamb side. So that should be a little tricky. Just leave it a little long and then just work the grinder over here until we get her just perfect. Let's see how this goes. Well, that went pretty good. So I got my tube in now, solid as a rock. Got it welded up on my plates on both sides. Made like a 22-degree cut on that end, and like literally this was one cut, fit perfect. Everything was perfect. So hopefully it goes as good on the other side. Right now I got the ladder bar in place. It's kind of like propped up with this extension here, and you can kind of get an idea of how this is going to play out. So I'll have to weld some ears coming off of here that this will attach to. And yeah, I got some steel plates to do that. So I have the 1/8 inch steel plates that I'm welding to the body, but the plates I got for those brackets I have to make is a little bit thicker. 3/16 I think is what I ordered for that. So did go with a little bit more sturdy bracket there because we're gonna have to use it not only for the front mounting point for the ladder bars, but also I'm gonna have to use it to make tabs for my shocks and anything else that ends up getting bracketed to the axle, like the panhard bar and all that. So I'm pretty happy with that. But really want to get this side dialed to exactly the way that it's going to be, so that when I move to the other side, I'm just copying. I'm not having to like align or figure things out over there, so everything will be kind of already figured out. So I got the little square rubbed clean of all the paint and stuff, and I'm just using this little spongy boy on the end of my drill. I don't know what this thing's called, some kind of abrasive thing, but it works really good for getting this paint off. And so the perimeter will be a nice clean surface to weld to. It is pretty tough to weld on this junk. It's really thin, and this plate is, you know, relatively thick, and so it's tricky. It's not hard to burn through, and I did burn through on the other side a couple of spots, but I'd say those two plates are probably, you know, 90-95% welded around the edges, and then there's a couple of small spots that I just couldn't really get a clean weld, or I kind of burned through the base metal, but I think they'll be just fine like that. I'm gonna try to do a little bit better on this side though. One of the challenges on the other side was the metal like dips down right there, and it is not easy to bend these plates. A good vise helps for sure, and I don't have a great vise, but basically I'm gonna make a bend through the half right here, just like right in the middle, so that it'll lay over flush with this part. And then for this dip right here, what I think I'm going to do, because there's no way I can put that bend in this metal, like to have the bend this way and like a little corner down. I don't think I can do that. So what I'll do instead is probably just go up underneath it with a hammer and pound the sheet metal with a hammer until it's more flush with this. And actually that's what I did on this side where all this took place. So this was really far down. You can see the wrinkles right there. That's not even welded in this spot right here. There's a big wrinkle. But I just beat it with a hammer so that it would reach the metal and I could put the welds down on it. So I think that's a decent solution. That's better than trying to fill a ginormous gap and just burning holes. So I'm gonna go down and start beating on it. So we got our plates welded in for this tube over here, and the tube is just sitting there right now. I got it cut and cut the angle, cut nicely, so there's a nice tight gap where I'm welding. And I took some measurements up to this little cross brace here in relation to this one here, our tube here that we installed, to make sure everything's pretty symmetrical. In fact, I took like dozens of measurements around, distance from here, distance off the ground. And I believe these two tubes will be perfectly symmetrical. So I also went ahead and grabbed the ladder over there and I held it up against the axle and made sure its relation to the bar looks the same. I've got the axle positioned where I think it's going to be sitting at ride height. It's positioned the same distance, or this, the same positioning in the wheel well as the other side. And I understand the wheel well, it's not the best way to manage that, but it's really the best I could do at the time. So now I'm just gonna get a quick measurement of wheelbase from that hub to that spindle on both sides. And as long as it's square, then we're gonna go ahead and assume that everything's symmetrical, everything's nicely positioned, and then I can lock down that bar once and for all. And next step from there is going to be making the brackets that will position the end of the ladder bar here onto these bars. And I'm gonna be making that out of this 3/16 steel plate. I'm gonna just draw something up, take it to work, and use our plasma cutter there to cut out 4 identical brackets that will then get welded onto our tubes and connect our ladder bar. At that point, we'll get our axle pinion angle close where we think is pretty good, and weld the ladder bar brackets, these guys here. We'll weld them onto the axle, get them all, probably start out tacking them on there, and then we'll be able to bolt the ladders to the car, make sure everything's square still, make sure everything's happy. There is some adjustability on the ladder bar. This adjustment here is to adjust pinion angle on the car. It's a little different than these. These you have to actually unbolt to adjust, but we have one here that there's adjustment on every point, a little bit. There's not a lot. I've already got this in the halfway point of its travel, same thing here. So if it needs to go one direction or the other a little bit, that's no problem. And then of course, same thing with our pinion angle adjustment. So if everything's pretty good and squared up and true, when we tack everything into place and fully welded in, then we'll be well within an adjustable range of pretty damn good. So at that point, we can get it to the shop, get it on the alignment rack, set our thrust angle, and we should be pretty good to go from there. Aside from that, there is still a couple critical points besides just the ladders and the axle. And that's gonna be, I'll have to make brackets for our coilover to attach to the axle. But I'm gonna go ahead and get our tube over there glued in. And man, at that point, we're gonna be pretty much done with welding on the chassis for the most part. At that point, I mean, we're just gonna be dealing with mostly the axle. Now that I got my bars all welded in, I gotta start thinking about bracketry for our front mount here. See, I just kind of have it hanging out on an extension right there. So I made this, just kind of cut this out of cardboard and kind of have it as a stencil. The extension's kind of in the way on that one, but I'll demonstrate over here how this is gonna fit. Is it's gonna weld like that. We'll have 2 of them, bam, bam. And then the, obviously our through bolt will go through this. And so I already traced this onto one of my plates, and you can see I can get 4 of these brackets made out of a single plate. So that's pretty thrifty because I still need plates for other things like the panhard bar and the strut mounts. So we're gonna need more steel. I've got 3 more plates of that. I can use this one plate and I'll have this nice little propeller shape left over that maybe I can use for something too. So I got a template made out of cardboard for the ears that I need to mount the ladder bar to our chassis. And with that, I was able to trace it onto a piece of steel. And this was the outcome of that. I got to work and I used the plasma cutter to cut these out. I've already made a small hole in them. I've got 4 of them right here. So I just need to make that hole big enough for one of these big ass bolts. So I'm just using the drill press right now to accomplish that. Once I got some properly sized holes in here, then we'll be able to weld these puppies onto the chassis and get our ladder bar in position on the car, start lining up our pinion angle, and get ready to start welding on the ladder bar brackets onto the axle. So now we're getting things done. We got our brackets welded onto the pipe and just kind of ran the bolt through to hold the front of the ladder there. And I'm working on this side now. Kind of tricky to get it totally symmetrical here. I just measured exactly 1 foot from the steel plate on the end. And the same thing over here, steel plate to this first one is right about 1 foot. Just try to keep things symmetrical. There's really not a lot to measure against that's very true and flat. So that's really the best I could do. And then we can get those arms in place. And I got I'll show you guys how I'm going to check the differential pinion angle. Because once I got the pinion angle set where I want it, I'll go ahead and tack on our ladder bar brackets onto the axle itself. So now that that's all welded up, we're gonna start looking into pinion angle so we can weld our ladder bar brackets to our axle. We're gonna be using this little digital fella right here to do that. And we have a pinion adjustment right here on the ladder bar, and I've got it kind of already screwed halfway out so we can go both directions on both bars. But that's not gonna give us a whole hell of a lot. That's just for minor tweaks. So what we need to do is get a couple of angle readings off of our differential and our transmission. All right, so we got our angle meter zeroed out. And to me, it looks like the plane of this is probably pretty close to a parallel. 0.2 degrees, so it's pretty damn level. Now we'll get a diff reading. We're gonna stick it right there. That's pretty good. Oh shit, let me re-zero this. 0. So now we have 0.43 on the diff. So we're gonna wanna take that number down a whole bunch, but you don't want it to be nothing. So obviously having the car on a level surface is very important to getting pinion angle set up or getting it close for sure. So I do have the car sitting basically how I believe it's going to whenever it has got wheels on it and the springs are supporting it. Like this should be ride height from the axle to the body of the car. So this is pretty much as close as I could possibly get it to sitting on the ground with wheels, you know, in the current state of the car. But we are pretty close. So we got about 0.7 or 0.8 degrees of angle on the differential pointing down in the front. So nose down, which I believe would be a negative angle. And then on the transmission up in the front, it's actually kind of nosed up slightly, about the same amount. So I got them matched. You want to definitely match the angle from the differential connection and at the transmission connection for canceling. But they have to be like opposite, the same but opposite. And then you'll have a similar angle from the transmission to the drive shaft and from the diff to the drive shaft, and that way they'll cancel each other out and everything will be smooth. So I like where it's at right now. I think we're pretty close. Now I'm just going to start measuring where I need to weld those bars to, make sure we're even on both sides, clean all the junk off of it, and put some spot welds on it, and we'll get those puppies fully welded. And then the links will be installed in the car 100%. I needed to make brackets for my stock coilovers to bolt onto the axle. So got the cardboard out, whipped up this little shape right here, and it's gonna look something like that there. I'm gonna do 2 of these, one here obviously, and that should give us the support we need to run our S13 style coilovers that we have on here. I really had to stretch this thing out to make it long enough to make sense, but I got quite a bit of body threaded in here. I accounted for 1.5 inches of squat, or not squat, but 1.5 inches of compression from just the weight of the vehicle, and still got plenty of travel in it there. So did have to make the bracket a little taller than I wanted to, standing off the axle, but we're using that 3/16 steel. I think it'll be plenty strong and up to the task. But once I found a shape I liked, I had to trim it down a little bit so I could manage to get 3 off of one piece of steel. And then we'll have to get this one, the 4th one, out of a separate sheet. But that will leave me quite a bit of this sheet here, and then I have 1 more of these. Hopefully I won't have to order any more steel plates after that. So tomorrow we'll get these up to the shop. On my lunch break, we'll cut them out using the plasma cutter, and then tomorrow night we should be able to get the coilovers mounted up, let the car's weight sit on the suspension.